Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Amanda Ziadeh with WashingtonExec, and today we've gathered a few CTOs and digital experts from GovCon to discuss the future of government services, human-centered, data-driven, AI-enabled, and securely connected. Our panelists today are David Egts, CTO of MuleSoft, Derrick Pledger, Chief Digital and Information Officer at Maximus, Matt Webster, CTO of Epoch Concepts, and Peter O'Donoghue, CTO of Tyto Athene. Thank you all so much for being here today.
Great to be here.
Thanks, Amanda.
Of course. So our first question is really solely about AI. It's on everyone's mind heading into 2026. From your vantage points as C-suite tech executives, what's driving urgency around AI adoption in government right now? And what does it mean for your respective companies? David, we'll start with you.
All right. Thanks, Amanda. Thanks for having me here. I'm just seeing a lot of the things that are going on the government. They're focused on accelerating their decision making, whether it's on the DoD side or on the civilian agency side. They want to make informed decisions a lot faster. And then the other part is improving service delivery and accelerating that. And I think that's where they're looking at how can AI be used to accelerate that decision making and deliver those services faster. And I also look at it too as when you start thinking about efficiency and driving results, I think about the inelasticity of human labor and how that could be augmented with agentic AI. So if I could pair up my finite amount of work staff to be paired with an almost infinite number of AI agents to help me with surges in call volume, whether it's during tax season or a natural disaster, you name it, wherever you had that lumpiness in terms of demand that outstrips the capacity for humans to satisfy, I think that's where a lot of our government customers are looking to apply AI. And that's where Salesforce and MuleSoft are helping out with Agentforce and our agentic platform.
All right, thanks, David. And Derrick.
Yeah, David stole a lot of my thunder, so I'll add
He does that, right? Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's driving urgency around adoption, outside of what David already mentioned, is that I think the government has come to the realization that being efficient or simply reducing manual operations in a specific workflow, leveraging AI, does not necessarily translate into effectiveness. So you can have a ton of AI across your estate, but if your data is not curated or it's not organized accordingly, and you have reduced staff by leveraging AI for a focused operation, in some cases you may have just created a more technically advanced ecosystem that is still failing to drive effective insight and outcomes. So for Maximus, we've really moved beyond the efficiency conversation to make sure that our AI implementations are judged by effectiveness, how we're increasing insights to drive decision making, and how do we turn those insights into action. And then taking action is what's really most important in my view. It's not just about the AI in and of itself.
Yeah, Matt.
Yeah. I think for what we're seeing is everybody's using AI, right? My 10-year-old and 13-year-old are writing stories with their friends. And large language models are here in a way that big data and cloud weren't. It wasn't, big data did not affect my day-to-day life in a way that I saw. Gen AI completely does. So I think as individuals in government, folks are seeing that, are wanting to push it. At Epoch, we're a solutions provider, and our big thing is how do you move out of that lab environment into production and helping the government move to that. I think the folks intuitively understand the value proposition of generative AI and large language models. And now let's move out of a science experiment and get into something that we can do in production. And that, I think, that crossing that chasm, I think, is the tough piece that we're all going to be working with government in 26 on.
And Peter, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think for context, I mean, at the risk of stating the obvious, we're all living we're all serving a customer, but I think one of the first 2 or 3 executive orders that occurred in the January timeframe was, and you could tell that AI was going to be front and center of a priority of this current administration, right? So we're all living in that world, and we're all kind of trying to work through that. I would argue that. Well, I would say what's coloring AI to some of Matt's point is we look around, like there is early evidence that AI is actually making a real impact in terms of what I would call both the mission use cases and the kind of the efficiency use cases. So there's real work happening right now, and actually there's elements of starting to scale. And obviously, we all have. I mean, I kind of tease Gartner sometimes that I think they're actually paid by the number of times they actually talk about LLMs and AI, but it's not just Gartner. It's like it's not just the analyst community. It's like all of our customers as well, right? But there's an awful lot of, a lot of kind of gap, if you will, between what people think they can do with AI, what they're ready to do with AI, and how to solve real problems. And for us as at Tyto Athene, we kind of look at the AI opportunity to kind of, we bifurcate it into two modes. And actually, David kind of poked at it as well, right? Which is, we at Tyto live what I would say like at the left of the common operating the common operating picture, which is assuring resilient network connectivity to the mission edge, and also making sure that data that's being generated at the mission edge is able to proliferate to where it needs to go to. Actually, I would say like the dominant thing as technical practitioners, particularly those who are serving Department of Defense, is that like we think that we're at a nation state level fight with our adversaries, and I think we're in effectively a data arms race that the nation states that are actually able to exploit the data that's available to them for mission advantage is the nation that prevails. And I use the term nation to mean the nation, but also their coalition partners. And there's a lot of complexity there, right? So the mission use cases are key, and the point's been made over and over, right? Which is taking low value human labor that is now automatable with the non-deterministic models that we have available to us. I think there's a ton of efficiency gains that ready to be made there too. So at Tyto, that's the space that we're in.
Awesome.
So Amanda, I think Peter glossed over one point very quickly, but I just want to reiterate and highlight, and that it relates to this idea of like if we get into a conflict with a nation state actor, the folks that can exploit data the quickest, folks that can move faster than the other, they win every time. So even if you think about having weapons superiority, information dominance, where you have technical systems that are more advanced than say China or North Korea or the Iranians, if it takes us 15 minutes to go from click to bang, or when we got receive some new intelligence data, it takes us 15 minutes to actually put a round on target. But the Chinese can take less data, less sophisticated systems, and do that in 10. We lose every single time. So that point that Peter made is incredibly important. So I think from a use case perspective, we should be thinking about how we can move with speed and make sure that proliferation of the data that Peter mentioned is something that it becomes ubiquitous, and we can do the right things at the edge, like trying to ship it all over the battlefield.
Makes sense. And yeah, we're going to get to that a little bit later as well, but just to kind of set the stage a little bit more, we've seen industry kind of push maturity models in areas like cloud and big data, which we mentioned a bit here in the beginning. What does that look like for adopting AI, and how should agencies self-assess where they are on the journey, or if they're even ready to progress there?
Yeah, I feel like AI maturity models is something we talk about a lot in Epoch, and getting folks using the tools to me feels like the biggest thing. So what is the lowest lift to get a chatbot into your environment so you can get to know it? Just like you would get to know any other piece of technology, this one, even without curated data, even without connections to other tools, the ability to have it proofread something to help you generate, I think is part of it. The other one is, and David, you summed it up exactly right. How are individual contributors going to be able to move from what they're doing today to managing teams, maybe unlimited teams of AI? And that shift is really, it's hard within the industry, and it's going to be really hard within government. And I think those two pieces, just as the entry point into the maturity model, is how do you start using these tools, and then how do you change your mindset into being less of an individual contributor and more of a manager?
I'd add to that a little bit too, Matt. I think one of the things that my crew has been experiencing is, I think with the focus on AI and LLMs in general, I think what we see is sometimes, like I'm trained as an engineer, and I tend to break things into engineering problems, right? And sometimes, we see customers who are so ready to kind of deploy AI. It's like they want to get to if you think of a dinner metaphor, they don't really want to eat the vegetables and the broccoli, and they want to go right to the fillet. But like in our own kind of practice, what we find is like I mean, there's tomes written on this, like understanding your data, how it's being produced, the quality of the data, the dependability of the data, the repeatability of the data, the availability of the data, the time, like all those things about data are critical. And frankly, the AI solution is only going to be as good as the data it receives, right? So I mean, that's a classic thing, and it forms an awful lot of the focus on any specific kind of maturity model. But the other thing is that we also find that having practitioners work with our customers, helping them understand if even AI is the right solution. I mean, sometimes we found that it's actually a linear regression problem, or it's a statistical problem, or sometimes it's a compute problem, right? So I think there's, like anything, like there's a lot of ways you can kind of hurt yourself. So I mean, I think working with maturity models help, and they help you kind of be honest about where you're at, but there's so much of a fever about AI and AI use cases that sometimes people like to jump right to the edge and start kind of solving problems, when like the mechanical things you have to worry about in terms of the data dependencies, and even is this the right kind of use case for AI, and actually the specific implementation of an AI solution. You kind of need to have, like, our experience is a lot of what we work with customers is helping put the guardrails on there, so that first set of use cases and solutions is actually going to be successful.
Yeah, and then from my side, I love what we're all talking about, the maturity models. Like, I was a fan when cloud first came on the scene, and then NIST laid down their definition, so we all had this common vernacular to talk about. So the thing I like about the maturity models is it allows the customer to self-diagnose where they are on that journey. And I thought Peter was going to say, instead of going for the fillet, going for dessert. But regardless, like at Salesforce, we have a maturity model where, it's like, you think about, like, I'm going to buy a car, and they all say they have self-driving, right? And well, what level of self-driving it is it, right? So having those definitions laid out so you could compare apples to apples is really important. So like for us, the continuum we have, it goes from level 0 to level 4. So level 0 is like fixed rules and flowcharts, very deterministic. Level 1 is let's do some retrieval augmented generation. So we could have a chat with it and it'll tell you what to do, right? Then level 2 is where you start getting a little bit more agentic of like, here's what you need to do. Would you like me to do that for you? And it starts to take action. Then level 3, that's when you start having complex orchestration of like an agent doing multiple things and touching multiple systems of record, like a ERP system and a HRM system and a travel system, right? And last is when you get to level 4, and that's where you have multi-agent orchestration, where you could have a travel agent that is delegating off to flights, and another one is doing a hotel, another one is doing a rental car, and you could grow those out. And the nice thing about that, and also the scary thing, is that those agents may not live within a government boundary or within a systems integrator's boundary. Imagine having a government travel system that is reaching out to an agent for United Airlines and another one for Delta Airlines, and they all talk and work with each other. So you got to lay that groundwork of like what Peter's saying, going straight to the fillet, or me saying going straight to dessert, of like, let's just connect all this data in. That could be disastrous if you don't do good data governance and security, and you sort of need to crawl, walk, run on that maturity model.
Yeah.
So I think I'm going to pick up on the cooking analogy and say that we're focusing on the meal, but we're not focusing on how we're cooking it. And the maturity model perspective, I think one thing that is missed is that I'm not certain that agencies, at least today, are able to assess where they are in terms of maturity models that are actually out there. In all honesty, if you think about where we are geopolitically, it's a very dangerous world, and we need to be prepared to react and defend ourselves against threats that are symmetric and asymmetric. So determining how mature you are when threats are evolving with increasing speed and sophistication every day could potentially be futile. And that's also, think about a public health use case where if another COVID-19 related type of pandemic or able to, it will start to be pervasive across the United States and the world. And we were sitting back focused on, hey, how mature are we to use AI? I mean, we should be focusing on that use case and what tools we'll use to be able to address that. So I think we do need to evolve to sort of a use case driven construct, and then how we focus on delivering and building capabilities and building a data foundations. Peter talked about that allow us to exploit the capabilities in furtherance of mission. And then we can continually assess our maturity along the way as it relates to capabilities that we're building. I just don't think we have the time to have a fully baked assessment of maturity.
Fully baked. I got it, Derrick.
Yeah.
Anything?
So we have to be able to move with speed because we're all building this plane in flight.
I haven't commented on the food analogy, and I love it, so I'll jump in too. I think I agree with everybody talking about wanting to jump ahead, whether it's the fillet or dessert or some baking piece from Derrick. But to me, those are where you're embedding generative AI into tools that you use, right? ServiceNow is a great example. They've got really powerful tools, AI tools that are built into that. We see it with Elastic. We see it with a lot of our different partners. The piece that I've been really interested in is what if instead of we're being served the meal, we're all brought together to cook, and who has knife skills, right? Who can be sure that you're putting enough oil but not too much oil in the pan? And I think those pieces, that kind of thing of how do I learn to know where an AI is good and where an AI is bad? And that is coming from making the meal. And a lot of folks will never have to do that, right? We can use these standard tools and it will help us and everybody will be great. But man, when you start wanting to really run fast and be able to use tools at scale, I think we're going to have those knife skills and cooking skills to be able to build those meals ourselves.
Awesome. Yeah. And, Peter, you had actually mentioned this before, that AI is only as good as the data that you feed it. So how do agencies get to a place where their data is trusted, secure, and available to drive decision-making and actually use these tools for the proper mission outcomes?
Well, I mean, this is where, I'm always torn, right? This kind of need to ensure quality, but I'm also torn with not wanting to have enough excessive governance and excessive enterprise architecture and kind of analysis paralysis and not being able to move quickly, right? So you need to have the right blend, right? But it's a lot of it is block and tackle, like inventorying your data, being able to profile it, make sure that and I kind of mentioned it briefly earlier, right? That the whole is it there available in a timely manner? Is it consistent over time? Do I have the right sources of data? Do I have the right data from the mission edge? For example, there's a lot of the DoD use cases that we see, and a lot of the heavy focus on AI in defense. There's some amazing products in there, but they're SaaS enterprise solutions. So, in order to be able to get to use Derrick's analogy, the flash to bang, or the kind of the sensor to kind of taking action, you have to have connectivity out to that mission edge, and that's got to be resilient, right? So in order to be able to have that in theater impact, do I have access to the data in a timely manner, right? But beyond that, then you also need to understand the impact and the likelihood and the impact of how is a model going to actually interact with data and data sets it hasn't seen before. So actually making sure that you have the continuous monitoring and you've got the ability to actually kind of evolve quickly, so you're not kind of waiting too long. Because the truth is, and the broad point I was kind of trying to make earlier is we as technology practitioners, 10 years ago, we were all practicing things like DevOps and cloud and automation. The reality is the same technology that we've been implementing for a while, actually, this is the technology that is actually ultimately going to help to win this next kind of arms race. So the extent to which you've got the right rigor, flexibility, but actually you're also aware of the quality, and the closer to the mission edge you can actually deploy that, and you can pivot quickly, I think they're all going to be key elements of how you deploy AI successfully to solve mission critical problems. At least that's my perspective.
Any other thoughts?
We do a lot of governance now, right? I mean, we've been doing this for years, and with cybersecurity, you see it. I think CUI has upended some things where in the top secret space, we really understand it, right? And paragraph markers and page markers and CUI, I think we're still trying to get that. And I'm seeing a lot of the generative AI deployed in the unclassified space. And so as a result, I think we're struggling with trying to learn how to deal with IL4 and IL5 at the same time we're trying to figure out Gen AI. But I think for the most part, we understand that. Peter, to your point, that I think is right, is you've got this brain. How does the brain deal with data it's never seen before? And in a number of RAG implementations I've seen, RAG comes out, it pulls out the different contexts, and it says, oh yeah, this is returning the data, but it didn't understand the broader context of the document. And so it's pulling out the wrong piece. And that is tricky too. So, I mean, do we move to graph RAG? I mean, there's all kinds of technical challenges that we have to come into. So I think my take is the governance side, it feels like we've got it, and now we just have to learn how to apply it with the large language models.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to add on a little bit too. Is the thing about like the data, AI is only as good as the data you feed it. Like there's a thing I'm going to double click on a little bit here too, which is data sharing. So like in theaters, particularly focusing on our defense customers. And actually, I'm headed off to Hawaii at the end of the month to go to the FC Indo-PACOM TechNet event. Right.
We'll see you there. Yeah.
Right. And but the thing is a potential kinetic conflict that may occur there. That AOR doesn't have the luxury of, say, a European AOR, in that like NATO doesn't really have kind of purview in the Indo-PACOM. So you basically have like a series of one-to-one bilateral agreements, right? So that means, your ability to share data actually becomes a lot more complicated. So like we think this is like a huge challenge and a huge opportunity actually for us in the DIB to basically partner with our friends in Department of Defense to be able to not only, the data governance piece is absolutely critical, but are there ways to tag your data, to implement, zero trust, to be able to like get right down to say what full motion video, what image, what data packet could and should be shared with my partner from the Philippines versus say Japan, and in what context, right? So the data, like I would say that dimension is as important as the governance and the quality element, which is how do I share it with the right partner? And it doesn't have to be Department of Defense. If you think of like the kinds of how missions get done at Homeland Security, or even the scientific missions of government, like the data sharing, being able to cleanly and simply share data for mission outcomes is as important as being able to like apply the right rigor and governance to the data itself.
Yeah, I think I want to pick up on that because we all agree that there's certainly a data problem as well as a data sharing challenge that we have to address. But I do think that there's a more insidious challenge that's a bit worse, and that is sort of this lack of policy and standards around how we define how data should be managed and leveraged across the civilian agencies and the joint force. So imagine you have the most pristine data sets that are right for AI expectation, but the lack of policy related to access, governance, chain of custody, if we want to share with our friends in the Philippines, and risk, it's still a losing scenario. So I think we do need to flip to a more adaptive policy framework that starts with security, but at least drives sort of this base level of standards. So policy enforcement becomes an enabler, a detriment to rather the evolution of AI operationalization, and then sharing at scale to not only define what mission is, but work together to drive outcomes. So good on you, Peter, for bringing that point up.
Yeah, and if I were to add a lot of great stuff here, one of the key things is that it's like, do we need to share everything with everybody? And obviously we can't. But what are some ways that we could address the underlying need without necessarily sharing all of the data? And so this could be an API call that says, is this a friend or foe? And then it returns a binary yes or no. It's not returning intelligence data to a coalition partner, like the raw data for them to make the analysis. But you could have it be either an API call or it could be another agent. As we talked about the level 4 orchestration of multiple agents, you could have a Philippines agent talking to a US intelligence agent that says, is this an enemy? Yes or no? And then it just says yes or no. And I think that's another way to solve the underlying problem. The other part that Peter brought up too is just to riff on it a little bit more, is the need for, when decisions are made, being able to replay the tape, especially when things go wrong.
Right.
And so like, it's like, oh, what was the decision-making process? What data did you use? And just the same, and I'll talk to customers and they'll be like, well, how perfect does your agent have to be, or your AI have to be? It has to be 100% perfect. And I would push back and say it only needs to be more perfect than your human employees, right? Because they are flawed. They have biases and all that. So, but, being able to do that observability, like you don't want to just like, again, jump into level 4. Let's build these agents. We'll throw them all out there. We don't know what they're doing. We don't know if it's working right or not, or it's successful. Being able to have that observability the same way that humans get annual performance reviews or more often, as part of their HR process. Are you doing the performance reviews of the agents that you're developing? And it's probably not on an annual basis. It could be on a, per hour basis on how effective they're being.
David, I love that because I think of everybody I work with when we make decisions. I really like this idea of, we put a dollar bet on something that's a year out, right? And we say, hey, I think 80% certainty, 90% certainty, this thing is going to happen. And you can't look into my mind. You can't see what I'm deciding. But man, with these large language models and the chain of thought, we can actually see what information is being pulled in, what decisions are being made, like rebuild those flowcharts. And I think that's going to give us capability that will unlock that we don't have currently. So yeah, it's really interesting to see how that evolves.
Yeah, I think that also segues really nicely into our next point here. In terms of real life scenarios and use cases in defense, we know that speed and accuracy of data can literally save lives. And in terms of today's top federal priorities, we know that efficiency and cost savings are key and kind of top of mind. So how do we balance the ubiquity of AI-driven decision tools with the trust and accountability required in these mission critical environments? Any thoughts there?
Yeah, I'll go ahead. I think part of it is coming up, getting those nice skills, getting the ability to use the tools. I think on the individual level, we're going to have to go through those growing pains, and then we'll rely on our partners that integrate AI into their tools. We're going to have to rely on our industry partners to do that the same. I think the two copilots that we use a lot are Microsoft Copilot and GitHub Copilot. So for non-technical and technical. And those two tools, watching the evolution, even month by month, it seems phenomenal, right? When I was using Copilot with Microsoft a year ago, it could give me maybe the right Excel formula, but nothing else. And now we can have some interactions with it. So I think that's one other thing that is kind of interesting in this trusting is that I came from an offensive, defensive, cyber background, and you could look at a system, you could validate it, and then for the most part, you would say, okay, for the known threats, you're set. I wouldn't have to check it the next day or the next month, right? I could just check it quarterly and I would be fine. That is not the case with AI. I mean, these things are evolving so quickly that continuous monitoring is going to be part of knowing that we can trust these systems. I think you guys have all seen in the podcast where somebody is interacting with an AI and have befriended it. And then the next day they open it up and it's like, well, wow, this guy's treating me so differently today, because they don't really understand the side of the large language model. And it just got an update. And now all of those pieces are different. And so, it is going to be much, much different in how we learn to trust and how much ambiguity we allow from how it was yesterday versus how it is today.
I mean, I would kind of add to that. I mean, I think like in the original conversations we were having, Amanda, about scaling, like I think as we go to kind of a next threshold of complexity, right? I think, so if I deploy AI across like a complex enterprise, and you do actually, like in my mind, having an ML ops strategy that is aware of model drift and recognizes that models are going to drift dissimilarly, and frankly, there may be adversaries who are trying to fool or to poison MLs. Like having the necessary tooling that is continuous monitoring for repeatable performance, and making sure that actually the models are actually kind of still fit for purpose. And the other use cases we talked about earlier is like, are those models encountering data that's actually driving them off into a different direction, or can they not process the data? Like there's a whole bunch of practical elements of governing your models, evolving your models, recognizing they need to kind of be fit for purpose today, but they need to be fit for purpose tomorrow as it learns more. But actually, it's kind of going in a predictable and an appropriate direction and defensive prediction. I mean, direction. These are all the elements of an enterprise MLOps kind of strategy that at least we would look to see going forward.
Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I can jump in on that. I was just going to say around the model ops discussion. I think that's certainly a salient point, because that drift is a real thing. I'm confronting that now at Maximus, because we have lots of models that are doing an incredible amount of operations across our VA customers and even in some other civilian agencies. I think one of the things that we always need to keep in mind, not relative to the model ops, the drift is when it comes to AI more broadly, is like, how do we bound the risk, right? Because there's always going to be risk there. From a trust and accountability perspective, we're going to have to accept some risk, but I don't think that there's a common definition or common agreement on what level of risk you will accept. It might be different in VA versus DoD. Mission critical environments will be different. So I think having a risk strategy that is mature to go along with how you're deploying and how you're operationalizing models is critically important, because in the absence of that, and you have model drift happening and things are just going rogue, and you don't have a way to bound that risk, that can open you up to APT actors doing some nefarious things within your estate, and none of us want that, both for in industry or within the government. That's one side. Then the top part of your question talked about cost and efficiency. I think we're kind of missing a boat if we just focus on efficiency and cost savings, right? Because it's really about effectiveness and insight, and making sure that the AI capabilities and the corresponding data sets that we're using are designed in a way that addresses very clear and pressing use cases, whether it's national security or civilian. I'm going to harken back to the same statement I made earlier. It has to be use case driven, and then an accurate measure of the efficacy of those implementations should be based on real metrics, real data. So simply capturing, hey, were we more efficient? It's not enough, right? I think we need to move past that to effectiveness, insight, and then how materialize into an action or mission outcome.
Yeah, if I were to add real quick too, it's, we talked a lot about speed, accuracy, decision acceleration, and everything. And a lot of times, depending upon, if I'm forward deployed, I may not have access to the cloud. I may not have the time to talk to a very big, large language model. It may be very expensive to talk to a very large language model, right? One of the frontier language models. And so a lot of people have been working on small language models, which, I thought at first when I heard about it, I'm like, that sounds disappointing. That's not cool. I want the biggest and baddest model that's out there. But the cool thing with the small language models is that you could, instead of having one generalist large language models that knows how to cook chili, all the, Shakespeare, everything, right? You could have a small language model that knows logistics. And all they know is logistics, and it's trained and it's distilled on logistics. So I could forward deploy that. It could run in the back of a Humvee, right? It doesn't have to be in a data center somewhere. And the neat thing about that too is that I could have so from a speed and cost standpoint, it's going to be a lot smaller and more cost effective. The other part is that by having it forward deployed, the decision making is going to be a lot faster, right? And you could be talking to live sensor data as well that is forward deployed instead of harvesting it, sending it off to a cloud, thinking about it, and by then it could be too late.
Good point. Yeah, and I want to make sure we talk about the human-centered design aspect of this as well. Even with powerful AI, if the user experience isn't there, missions can fail. So with the new America by Design executive order, how do we make sure government technology, whether AI enabled or not, is actually working for citizens and employees in a streamlined, human-centered way?
Yeah, I mean, we've been fighting this battle for a long time, right? ETNF, I think, was they did some big inroads in that, and this is a continuation on that piece. I know that internally with Epic Concepts, we're trying to move all of our workflows out of email, out of Excel, and just putting it into a web app for a lot of people. Peter, you're talking about being able to share data, right? For us to know where a request is, to be able to make decisions on that. That's not even AI, right? I mean, that's all human intelligence, just saying, I have access to this data in a secure way and I can move forward. And I don't have to make 3 emails and a phone call to find out where we are. That to me is like the core of this user-centered design. It is interesting with large language models. I feel like we all see that disclaimer that says, hey, this data may not be true, right? There might be hallucination, which does not feel like that is not a good human-centered design approach. I mean, it is the least we can do. But yeah, we definitely, I think, both and in industry and government need to move forward to be able to understand how we can better meet the user needs at the point of presence.
Yeah, I mean, I would add like the experience that we've had. Again, I'm probably going to be excessively focused on the warfighter experience, but I mean, if you think fundamentally what we're talking about here with we talked about data and data share, and we talked about AI as kind of a decision engine over top of that. But at the end of the day, like if what we're trying to do is, I mean, the use cases I keep harping back, I go back to is that of the warfighter. I mean, fundamentally, it's around, I've got this data, I've been able to share it, I've got a recommendation that's coming out. I need to be able to put it on a TAC device for a warfighter to be able to take action in theater, right? So, like I've never served, and actually I really respect those who have, but I can't imagine what it's like to be in a high pressure situation. And the last thing you want to have is you've overcomplicated how a recommendation is going to be painted on a screen. You don't really understand, the stress and the pressure that warfighter's under, and just like the cognitive load and the ability to actually to have something that's crisp and clear and easy to use. And sometimes I might be kind of like, looking to my interaction style with, a recommender on a TAC device is just tell me what's on the southeast corner of building 2 and tell me what's gone on there. So again, like you got to think through, like, I mean, Derrick's banging on this drum about the use cases, like understanding the use case, but understanding the context in which your solution is going to be used. Like everything that we've learned in terms of human factors, I think is at least as important and that has ever been, if not more so, right? Which is now we're putting a lot more powerful tools, but if you're lazy or you don't really understand how the user is actually going to be able to use this in a high stress situation, you've really achieved nothing, right? You got to really understand the use cases and the context and the stress and the human elements of how you're going to use this thing to be able to be successful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Peter made a phenomenal point there, and I as someone who has had a few all expense paid trips to Iraq and Afghanistan, both in uniform and as a contractor, our job as industry and sort of the DIB writ large is to reduce the cognitive burden on the warfighter to be able to make a split decision in high pressure environments. Like that's the mandate. That's really our job. So to the extent that we can use AI to move along on that spectrum to where instead of having to move through 10 data points, AI does 7, and then that warfighter just has to move through 3 to make a critical decision. I think that's the burden that it's our job to remove. And then secondarily, even if we have the greatest amount of tools and AI capabilities that we can field, I think adoption is key. So from a human-centered design perspective, bringing folks, whether it be a warfighter or whether it be a citizen, into the elementary phases of design and aligning those capabilities that solve like a real world problem, I think that's key. Because even if you have the greatest widget, but you fail to over communicate and talk about how you drive change management, and in the face of that resistance, I think you could still be a failure, even though you have something that it's an incredible capability. And I think everyone needs to be strategically aligned to make sure we understand what outcomes we're going after, and then how we're using AI or specific workflows to address that. So yeah, a couple good points from my colleagues here.
Yeah, and when I think about the human-centered design, I'm thinking about like what Derrick and Peter said about the soldier in the foxhole, right? They got to make decisions. You can't have one size, if it's an AI chatbot or something, it can't be one size fits all in terms of, its personality and how it interacts with somebody, right? And that's where I think you almost need to, I don't want to say brand it, but you need to look at the persona of each person that you're engaging that AI with, and make sure you're speaking their language in the way that they want to receive it. So it's the person in the foxhole. It could be on the other side. It could be, think of the 18-year-old that logs into the recruiting site, and there's a chatbot that says, and hey, I'm thinking about joining the Army or the Marines, and tell me all about this. Well, maybe you want the personality of that chatbot to be compelling and engaging and meeting that student where they are, right? And then mix it up. It's like, what about I go to the NASA webpage and I want to talk to a chatbot, a teenage kid talking about STEM on the NASA webpage and getting them excited about science. Those are, you can't say one size fits all. We're going to have a government AI and it's going to talk to everybody the exact same way. If you really want to be effective, you got to meet the people where they are in the situation that they're in.
I love that through DevOps and through our software development, we've gotten there, right? I think the classic example is you have an inventory system that was built for accounting, but the folks on the floor are having to use it and they have to go through 6 clicks. It's like, no, I don't care, because it made it really easy for the accountants to pull a report, and they're the ones that are paying for it. And so, right, the UI, nobody cared about the UI, they cared about the data. And I think now we're in this spot. I look at my 13-year-old iPhone. It doesn't even look like, I can't recognize it because it's so different. It's different than any other phone I've seen. All the icons are different, all the colors are different, and she's been able to modify it so that it is exactly what she wants. I think with Gen AI, I mean, we have this opportunity to be able to do that, David. So, right, just like you said, every user can have their own experience, but we can share the same data. And that, I think, is really powerful, and it'll allow us to move much more quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I know we've talked about a few concepts here as it pertains to AI, and I, wish we could dive a little bit deeper to each one. But some final thoughts as we look towards 2026 and beyond in terms of what's next. What are the next steps in AI adoption for government? Perhaps how can they start overcoming some of the roadblocks we discussed today, quickly or soon? Any final thoughts there?
I mean, I would kind of just as a quick overview. What's next is, and we've poked at this, right? Is that there's been like point problems that have been solved. Well, we got to scale those, right? So enterprise approach to model ops and ML ops is going to be important. Understanding that the quality, the dependability, the repeatability, the data governance, the data, like all of those ilities as they apply to decision making. I think we're going to start that journey. I think we're going to make a lot more progress here in the next 1 to 2 years. I would say reference architectures and standards. I mean, as we all like each one of us on this call, we all work for companies that actually all can add value. So understanding how we can participate in an ecosystem, understanding how things can be integrated, and understanding like how we almost like I'm an old SOA guy, a services-oriented architecture guy from way back in the day. And this idea to be able to harness the power of the ecosystem to solve problems quickly and almost have a set of contracts. So like those reference architectures that promote, competition, but also promote collaboration and cooperation. is going to be really important, because I worry sometimes that there's some walled gardens that are being put up right now. And I think having, more focus on openness and interoperability and allowing for more to participate, equally well in an ecosystem will be important. And I think that the last thing I would probably just talk about is, and actually I think David talked about it, is we're kind of seeing the LLM thing, like the agentic and like the orchestration of agentic is going to be really important, right? So this knowing when to use LLMs, but also those SLMs. Like, I think as you frame out the use of SLMs can actually behave a lot more predictably and deterministically, if you will, than say an LLM. I mean, if you think of what we've been trying to do with LLMs, we've been trying to have like this one all-knowing, all-thinking entity that's actually trained on all data that sometimes you have to wonder, is this really the right way to go? I do think SLMs and orchestrating SLMs and allowing us to participate in an ecosystem, these are the kinds of things that I would expect to see in the next year or so.
Yeah, so Peter brings up a very interesting challenge, I would say, and that is, we have really talk about this because we've been so technology and operationalization of AI focused, but in a world where agentic and the orchestration of agentic capabilities across an estate becomes the norm, on the government side, how does acquisition evolve to be able to price or elicit pricing from an industry partner or a contractor that perhaps used to say, hey, we're going to do cost plus fixed fee, or we're going to do time and material, we're just going to put 100 people in seats and we're going to deliver capability and turn over the keys. What about if you have, instead of those 100 people, you have 10 managers and then you have 90 digital workers, right? How do you price that? How are we going to evolve the acquisition regime within government, and then to make sure industry can really be focused on outcomes, right? I think I don't have an answer. I know I just put it on the table, but I think that's something that collectively we all need to think about, where we will be when agentic is ubiquitous, and what is it for us in terms of partnership with the government.
I'm also seeing at Epic, we've always been capabilities focused, and because we bring a lot of partners together to put together that single solution. I think Gen AI is going to be another one of those capabilities that allows us to get after the requirements and get after where we're going. So I don't think that piece will change in the next year or two. What I do see changing, though, and I think we've all alluded to this, is that the individuals on the ground are going to have so many more tools at their disposal, and they're going to have to learn new tools on a monthly, right, if not weekly basis. And I think that rate of change, more than ever, is just increasing. And I think fortunately we're seeing it in our personal lives, so we're able to kind of get that momentum going and get that acceleration running. But I don't know how government can avoid it, and our adversary is not avoiding it. So leaning into that change and knowing that as a group we have to move faster, I think is part of where we're going.
Yep.
David, the final word.
Yeah. So for me, we talked a lot about technology today, right? Oh, do I want small language models, large language models? I need a RAG. I need some, vector databases and everything. And the thing, my suggestion for the govies out there is don't fall in the trap of okay, we're doing AI, we're going to do a bake-off and figure out the perfect LLM, and we're going to, to me, those are tools, right? You also got to be working on the change management part of it, because if you have the best LLM, the best tools out there, but if you're not doing the change management to encourage people to use it and share successes and celebrate successes and normalize the use of it, where it could be stigmatized as oh, I don't want to tell somebody I used AI for this. You want to celebrate that. Otherwise, the adoption is going to really hold back as well. And also, it's not just hey, eat your vegetables, it's going to be awesome. You also have to be willing to take the hard and critical feedback as well to make your application better as well. So get that user feedback to show how, and be able to say, hey, we heard you. This new rev that we came out with this month has we factored in your improvements and your suggested feedback. and to show that their voices are being heard. And so instead of them just throwing their hands up saying, I'm never going to use it again, they'll be like, hey, they listened to me. I'm going to give it another shot if they didn't get it right the first time.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I know that we could have a whole other conversation on pretty much all of the points you all just made to close here. So thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on this with us, for covering these topics. I really appreciate all of you being here today.